he's giving last rites to a Confederate soldier, and it's his regimental commander, Colonel Grace of the 10th Tennessee, and he's mortally wounded. So
wow, I am so privileged right now. The Evan Portman is sitting in front of me. Master and commander, I don't know. Anyways, welcome, Evan. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks. That's a good movie, by the way, Master and Commander.
It is actually a fantastic movie.
Russell Crowe.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite actors.
That's fair.
I mean, Gladiator, like one of my favorite movies. Mr. Evan, I don't even know what your middle name is, but
John.
John.
How could you forget that? Yeah.
Actually, that's a great story. We'll start. I was at St. Vincent. Our RAs are called prefects. And as a senior, I was the prefect for Evan's freshman pod. Instead of halls, the freshman dorm is set up in these things called pods, which are kind of a living room space with like about 12 rooms off on the sides.
Yeah, like a suite, I would say.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Well, the information I had about Evan was, for some reason, they had his father's name down instead. So on my list, I had my residence name was John Portman. So,
which is also my middle name.
Right. Yeah. John, actually, because Evan is just another translation for
John in Welsh or something. Yeah.
So his roommate gets there, who's also his best friend. And the first thing Chris says to me is, his name's not John. That's his dad's name. I'm like, oh, whoops. Well, it stuck. So actually, pretty much most of Evan's best friends in college call him John.
Yeah, especially one in particular.
Yes, yeah. You know who you are.
I know he's listening.
Yeah. So, anyways, Evan John Portman is a graduate of St. Vincent, history and education, and is now finishing his master's at Duquesne, also in history. And your particular field of study is the Civil War.
That's right. Yeah.
Why the Civil War?
Well, that was the first kind of like area of history that I got into. So I guess I'll give the spiel I give everyone.
Yeah.
Like I was 7 years old and we went to an outdoors like convention in Monroeville, and there were a lot of like hunting booths and hunting, fishing, camping. But Gettysburg happened to be there for whatever reason, and I went up to the booth and they had a brochure from the gift shop, and I took it and I couldn't stop looking at it. So we scheduled a trip to Gettysburg after that, and the rest is history.
Wow. Oh, wow. I like what you did there.
Thanks. Yep.
That's cool. I've never been to Gettysburg.
I know. That's yeah.
And I was actually just talking about it with my mom, and she said, well, when we go, Evan will have to be our tour guide.
Wow. I'm honored. Yeah.
So, maybe this summer.
That's right. Yeah. I'm always up for it.
But I've also loved studying the Civil War. Joshua Chamberlain is one of my heroes.
Same here.
And on the Confederate side, James Longstreet is also he's a goat.
He's a boss.
He is. Yeah. So speaking of the Civil War, pretty interesting history when it comes to monks, actually, and the Civil War, particularly monks from my community, St. Vincent in Latrobe. And that's been like a particular field of interest for you.
Yes, yeah,
and he knows way more about this than I do. That's the whole reason he's here. And you wrote an article, actually, recently in, what was the journal you wrote it in?
Well, for St. Vincent, it's St. Vincent's in-house interdisciplinary journal called Conversatio, which is one of the Benedictine hallmarks.
Yes, yep.
And then I also wrote one for, it's called Gathered Fragments, which is the journal of the Catholic Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania.
Okay. And so Evan also works as a contributor for the American Battlefield Trust, right?
And Emerging Civil War.
Okay, wow. Yeah. So big deal here. And is this, did they approach you asking for this article because you're writing something else, or? Yeah,
so I wrote a blog article for Emerging Civil War about a monk from St. Vincent that was in the Confederate Army. And after reading that, Dr. Foss, who's the director of Catholic studies here at St. Vincent, he approached me about writing one for Conversatio.
Okay.
And then kind of in the meantime, I got connected with the Catholic Historical Society of Western PA, and they approached me about writing something for them. So
Okay. That's sweet.
Yeah. Always writing.
Yes. Oh, well, that's, I have certainly approved.
Yeah, I love it. So that's what I'd want to do.
Well, yeah, so today we just want to talk about those monks and the kind of some history of St. Vincent. We haven't done a lot of history, particularly of my community. We've talked a little bit now and then, and I thought this is certainly a very niche thing to talk about. First I want to talk about the monk you mentioned, because he's the one I actually kind of know something about. Edwin Bimmel? Emeran. Okay. Yeah. Not a most common name ever.
And I shout out to Brother Bruno here. He said the pronunciation is Bimmel. Okay. And it's spelled depending on who you read, it's spelled different ways. Blimmel. But, Brother Bruno said that it's pronounced Blimmel. Okay. So, and he's from Germany. So
makes sense.
Yeah,
Which our house came from Germany. And Boniface Wimmer, as our founder, came and established St. Vincent as the first Benedictine monastery back in 1846, and to particularly looking to help German Catholics in this area, in Western Pennsylvania. And very quickly, other bishops of other dioceses around the country started asking for help from St. Vincent monks for ministry and for mission, like pastors or whatever, teachers. And that included communities and states and dioceses south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Yes.
Including Tennessee.
Yep.
Which is where we get connected with this monk.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of crazy that less than 20 years after the monastery was founded, the country already flew into civil war, and the monks were like right in it right away.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. So, Father Emeran Bimmel, he was born Michael, was his baptismal name, and he was born in Bavaria. So very similar to Boniface Wimmer, the founder. And he came over here, I think in the 1850s, and joined St. Vincent. And he became a math professor in the college while he became a priest also. And he was assigned to, first Covington, Kentucky was his first assignment. And then he requested to go to Nashville, kind of right on the eve of the Civil War. So we don't have much documentation, but I question, why cross the border there in 1859, 1860? Yeah. But then he served a parish in Nashville, and many of his parishioners then enlisted in the Confederate Army. So he was right in the thick of it in 1861, 1862. So,
and he wanted to be part of the Confederacy, right?
Yeah, and he actually, in 1863, he was caught smuggling morphine to the Confederate Army, and he was arrested in Nashville. By that time, Nashville had been captured.
Yeah, that was one of the first major cities to be captured in the Civil War, right?
I think the first Confederate capital to be captured. Okay. So in 1862, to kind of give you a timeline, Union armies come into Tennessee and they capture Nashville. So then Father Bimmel was living there in Nashville under Union occupation, and he's cut off from St. Vincent. So Boniface Wimmer is back here why aren't we hearing from him? What's going on? And then in December of 1863, he's arrested for smuggling medicine, and he's interrogated, and that's the only real source we have of why he joined the Confederacy. And he said he believed that the Confederate States were denied certain rights that they were entitled to, and he thought that was bad. So, but he doesn't go into any specifics, obviously. So then he's released on order of General William Rosecrans, who was a Catholic himself. So
some dicey,
right? Yeah. Even though Rosecrans was from the north, and his brother actually was a bishop. So, he pardons the priest, Father Bimmel, and then later on, he's arrested again because they suspect he's writing for a pro-Confederate newspaper. But then they prove that that's not actually the case. Yeah. So.
But they still suspected. So that meant they knew he had somewhat Confederate sympathies.
Yes,
And so there's also a really interesting fact about this priest, this monk, right? He's the only Catholic chaplain to have died in the Civil War.
Yeah, in battle, too.
Okay,
so,
right.
yeah, after he's arrested, he comes back to Nashville, and he procures these papers from the Bishop Verreau of Savannah, and he rides across Union lines to the Confederate Army, and he joins up with the 10th Tennessee Regiment, which had some of his parishioners in it, and he becomes their chaplain. And his duties are divided between the 10th Tennessee and some Kentucky regiments, actually.
Okay.
So he was in Kentucky before the war, and they become kind of connected with him, and he's one of the only Confederate Catholic chaplains in the army out west at that time. So because most of the armies were Protestant, the Catholics were definitely the minority. But
that's crazy. And the way he died, if I'm correct, he got his head blown off.
Yes. So he,
Like in a way, what an epic way to go.
That's very explosive. No pun intended.
Wow.
But so he travels with the Confederate Army in the Atlanta campaign, and at the Battle of Jonesboro, which is just outside of Atlanta, he's giving last rites to a Confederate soldier, and it's his regimental commander, Colonel Grace of the 10th Tennessee, and he's mortally wounded. So Bimmel comes over to him, and he's giving him last rites, and a shell comes in and strikes him in the head.
Dang.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's buried down there in Tuscumbia, Alabama. So after the war, Boniface Wimmer didn't know what happened to him until later on in the war, kind of the next year in 1864.
Oh, man.
But they didn't know where he was buried. So Father Otto Kopp, which was one of Father Blimmel's confreres here at the monastery, goes down to Georgia because he's assigned to a parish down there, and he kind of adopts this as his project. He's like
documenting,
and trying to find where Father Bimmel is buried. So finally he locates him in Jonesboro, and then he arranges to have him taken to the parish that he's serving in Alabama. So,
and that's where he stayed.
Yes.
Is there any kind of like monument or anything down there that you know of?
No monument, but he has a headstone.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And he's not the only monk, right?
No.
And so, do you know either for him or for other monks who might have been more like Confederate in their leanings, what kind of tension does that cause? Because, I mean, I know the tension that we have here over other things, much less like the way the whole country is divided. He wasn't the only monk who, in a way, was on the South, right? There was, or was there like...
Not necessarily. I mean, he was the only one that served in the Confederate Army, to my knowledge. But there are accounts here during the war of students that got into some arguments during the Civil War because I think about 20% or so of the student body was from the South.
Oh, wow.
And they couldn't, during the Civil War, they couldn't come back.
Yeah.
And they couldn't pay tuition either because they couldn't go home to get mom and dad's check to give to Boniface Wimmer. So that created some tension for Wimmer because he was like, I'm not getting paid for these kids to go to school here. But there are accounts in the cafeteria, or what was the cafeteria at that time, of students from the South and students from the North getting into heated arguments about the war. And at one point, the Southerners even raised the Confederate flag over St. Vincent.
Oh, dang.
Yes, and that did not make some of the local Latrobe farmers happy.
Why not?
I know,
They're
right?
such friendly people.
Yeah. Yeah, so they came knocking on Wimmer's door, and he didn't know about it. So he made demands, that they take down the flag immediately. Yeah.
So what was then, like, in either the recovery period where there was probably monks who either had served in the war or at least had been in the South and then later joined. Yeah. Or just, I guess, more connected to your particular article. Because, right, it was something about, like, brother against brother. Or,
that was, the title.
What relationships and what tensions, and then how did either Boniface Wimmer or the rest of the community come to resolve and to respond to that stuff?
Okay, yeah. So one of the areas of my interest were these monks that were unwillingly drafted into the Civil War.
Oh,
so,
wow. Okay.
Basically they, Boniface Wimmer was largely opposed to the war,
Right.
being a Catholic German at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of Germans in the Union Army, but there were a lot of Catholics that were opposed to the war, and to the Lincoln administration for one reason or another. And Boniface Wimmer was one of them. So and legitimately, he was very worried that if he lost monks to the war, he couldn't be able to support his monastery.
Okay.
So in his letters, he's very fearful that this whole American Benedictine experiment is going to collapse during the Civil War.
Less than 20 years after he gets here.
Yes. So that's a very real fear for him. And in 1863, when Congress passes the First Enrollment Act, which initiates the first draft in American history, about 6 or 7 monks are called into Union service during that time. And he writes President Lincoln in June 1863, saying, "This is a bad idea. Like, you can't make me send these guys." And he even says they wouldn't make very good soldiers. They're not. They're in temperament. They're not like warriors. They're
monks,
men,
right?
Men of the cloth.
Exactly.
So he sends a letter to Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and that kind of falls on deaf ears because they're worried about the Gettysburg campaign at that time. So about 5 or so monks report for duty in the 61st Pennsylvania Regiment in July of 1863. So right after the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And we have these letters from one of them, Brother Bonaventure Gall, and he's from Germany too, born in Bavaria. And he has, I think there's about 12 or so letters where he talks about his service. And they eventually, Wimmer got them to be able to be nurses and not shoulder, except for one of them. One of them still had to shoulder a musket and fight. But
that's so wild.
I know. Yeah.
We've come, I mean, if you're ordained minister in the army now or the military, like, you're not to have a firearm on you. That's the whole thing. And the fact that there was no like religious exemption, or like they didn't even take any of that fact into account is wild to me.
Well, the priests here were exempt.
Oh, okay. So these were brothers.
These were all lay brothers. Yes. And Wimmer talks about that, like in Europe, this isn't a thing.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Welcome
to America.
Yeah, basically. But Gall, he serves as a nurse throughout the rest of the war, and he's in some of the battles of Winchester and Cedar Creek, and the Petersburg campaign. And he actually, in his last letter, he talks about Lee's surrender at Appomattox. So
that is epic. Actually.
Yes, it is.
It's so, it just blows my mind how connected this monastery has been to so many things, and yet people don't know about it. I find both that people who I would never suspect would know anything about St. Vincent are like, "Oh my gosh, I love that place," or "I've heard of it." For people from like, when I was in Portugal, just like in Lisbon last year, people will be like, "Oh, I've heard of St. Vincent." I asked where they're from, and like, "Oh, I'm from France." I'm like, okay. But then people literally in Pittsburgh, an hour from us, have no idea. But this just proves that like we had our hand in, at least immersed in American history, basically from the start of us coming here.
Yeah, and to answer a little bit of your question about the reconstruction recovery of the war, St. Vincent founded a school for free blacks in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah,
and it failed epically.
Yes, it did.
But that being said, they were kind of on the front lines of educating freedmen and like participating in this reconstruction after the Civil War. And one of them, his name was Brother Innocent Carter. He was born a slave and served. We think he served in the Union Navy during the war.
Okay,
and then he became a Benedictine monk. Yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know Wimmer has a letter where he talks about like the need, if the blacks are being emancipated, that these African Americans, someone needs to take care of them.
Yeah,
like if you can't just write a letter. I think he basically says you can't just like write a letter that says, "Oh, they're free," and then have no plan for it.
Yeah,
which obviously Lincoln getting assassinated certainly undid probably a lot of his plans that he had for facilitating African American education and integration into the country, but Wimmer was pretty like aware that this could be a problem.
Yeah. So
it is neat that we tried. Obviously, we didn't do so well, but our presence in Savannah actually still held though.
Yeah.
Because we did have a parish down there after that. tried to be involved in another school, and then now we actually are in charge of a all-boys military Benedictine high school, which is like a super niche thing.
Yeah.
It's very, what's the word, bougie, I would say. And it actually produces like the highest or one of the highest recruitments into naval and like, or just military academies, like of any high school.
Wow, I didn't know that.
They get like 2 or 3 into West Point, a couple into the Naval Academy, a few in the Coast Guard Academy, the Citadel. And they only graduate about 110 kids because they really try to keep it like a little over 400 as their total student body. So, and they were 2-time Georgia State champs for football back in 2021 and 2022. So they know what they're doing down there.
Yeah.
But the connection traces back to Wimmer commissioning monks to, go into the Deep South and actually do something.
And before and after the Civil War, there are monks all over like in Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Cincinnati, obviously. So yeah, there's definitely a pretty strong connection. The
Texas monks, do you know much about them?
No, I don't actually. I mean, a little bit, but not.
So I also don't know like a ton, but they were down there before the Civil War started. They had gotten there like only months before, and then the South seceded, and obviously Texas was very quick to join. And they banned the monks from leaving because some of the other communities that were in the South, they like. I guess some of them offered, free transportation or free passage back to the Union if they wanted.
Right.
But these people in Texas said, nope, you have to stay here. And they cut them off like almost all communication from the monastery.
Wow.
They got some letters out to them were basically saying like, we are starving. We don't have anyone to take care of us. And I think almost all of them ended up dying. I think there was like 5 or 6 down there, and I think 4 of them died. 2 of them they lived past the end of the war, and they were able to come back. But Texas didn't bode well for the monks.
And at that point, Texas still kind of is like isolated. Yeah. But at that time, that's like the wild, wild west.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. That's cool.
What have you found has been like the most eye-opening part about the involvement of the monks in the Civil War? Well,
so to kind of give you a little bit of backstory, we came across these letters, and they, people had known that they existed, but they had never been translated from Old German. So I kind of recruited Father Warren Merman here, who translates Old German script in his free time.
Just a casual flex.
Right, yeah. So he helped translate all of them, and I kind of expected to read them and learn, like, that they would be fighting on the front lines, and like the Joshua Chamberlain story where the Civil War makes him, like, that's his claim to fame.
Yeah.
But as I read these letters, most of them are just Brother Bonaventure Gall talking about how horrible this is, and like he's like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be here at all.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's kind of eye opening that like a lot of these draftees, did not want to be fighting in the war, and it shows you the difference between the volunteer soldier,
exactly,
and these conscripts who were like, about it, And I mean, he's witnessing history, and I talk about that in the article, but unwillingly he's witnessing history. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And I think about just kind of like the dichotomy of being a monk and then asked to be, an active participant in a war.
Yeah.
There has been monks who have been military chaplains in, all of the wars that the U.S. has engaged in since we got here, including monks who were even very recently military chaplains. And there's one thing about that, the chaplaincy of serving the spiritual needs of the monks, but that is not why they were being drafted. Right? They were being drafted to fight, which really goes against, not entirely, but almost in a strong way, what Benedictines are supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Benedict left Rome and left the whole culture because he saw like the debauchery and the violence of the people, and he wanted to flee the world in a sense to find peace and security with Christ. And that the vow of stability that we take really is kind of rooted in peace in Christ. And then to be actively involved in a war to bring about anything, well, I guess the goal is peace, right? The goal of war should be peace,
Right.
but it's still,
That's a whole question for another time.
exactly. But I could see like just an inner turmoil too. That not only were like these conditions horrible, I didn't volunteer for this at all, but this goes against the vows I took.
Yes.
Like I didn't vow to be a soldier. I vowed to be a monk.
Right.
And man, I just did brother Gall. Did you have any letters from him or like accounts after he got back, like how he tried to
readjust?
Yeah.
No, but we do know he worked as a cobbler before the war for the monastery, and he did that after he came back. And in his letters during the war, he talks about, he's like, I don't know if I want to stay here in America, like because he hadn't taken his solemn vows yet.
Okay.
He's like, maybe I want to go back to Germany and go home.
Dang,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't. He stayed here, and he actually took his skills as a nurse, and he used them to treat sports injuries at the college here. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Providence has its way of working.
I guess
out,
so.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, man, I had a final question. Oh, yeah. So a lot of these monks were German, right?
Correct.
And I remember in your senior thesis presentation, you were looking at Germans' involvement in the Civil War, and they were one of, or if not like the largest nationality, right? That was in the Civil War. Did any of the monks talk about like trying to help at least their fellow,
Germans?
Yeah.
German Americans?
Yeah.
Not really. But I mean, all of their letters are written in German. So, and they themselves, if they didn't know each other in Germany, they kind of got to know, their fellow Germans here. And I know they were connected with a Swiss priest in Washington, D.C., who actually coincidentally was a priest to Mary Surratt, who was involved in the Lincoln conspiracy, or supposedly, and he was writing the president and the administration on behalf of them to get them out of service, and obviously to no avail. But so that somehow they became connected with him. Probably, he's Swiss, German.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally they're similar, especially at that time.
Right.
But no specific mention of like other Germans. If anything, they're talking about like this kind of stinks because I'm the only German, or like I'm the only Catholic in my regiment too. So,
but I bet still at somewhere, certainly uncounted, there was other Germans in those regiments or Catholics, who probably just did, especially if they had been drafted like these monks. It's a sense of security or of just feeling, okay, God maybe is here in this seemingly godforsaken time right now.
Well, and Father Bimmel, we know in his regiment too, there was a lot of Germans and Irish. So
So Catholics.
Yeah, definitely.
And especially back for them, going back to him in the Confederacy real quick. Like you said, there were so few Catholic chaplains. Reading a little bit of your first article about him, he was really loved by a lot of people. Yeah. And they really defended him. I think like the general who you said got him out of prison. And just the regiments he served, he went to that Tennessee 10th, right? Because he was connected with them, and I don't know if they specifically asked for him to come, but he knew that these were people I know and love, and I want to be with them and serve them. Also, he felt, that the states' rights were being violated. That's that too. But he had some pastoral connection with them. Yeah. Which, to kind of take something for all of us in a way, that no matter what the situation we're put into, we can always find a way to bring God into it. Whether a country ends up flinging into a second civil war, God forbid. But as St. John of the Cross said, if you don't find love, put love into it. And so he saw a need, and instead of trying to wait around for someone else to fill it, he did it. He put the love there. And in a place, or for people who, half the country said are now unlovable, right? Because, or, forsaken, they're not even human. I mean, at least, and some of them didn't act like each other were human. The brutality between the northern and southerners. I just really love what my community, I can't boast that I had obviously anything to do with this since I wasn't born for 200 years later, but still,
No, yeah, I think it's a proud moment in St. Vincent history that like not that many people know about. We know about Boniface Wimmer and stuff, but a lot of people don't know that St. Vincent was basically in the Civil War and almost had a Civil War here itself. So
yeah, that's wow. So if this has been interesting for you guys, or you found something you're like, wow, okay, maybe I want to look into that more, you can check out Evan's article in, there you go, yes, Gathered Fragments, or in the Emerging Civil War, right? That was
yeah, you can go online to emergingcivilwar.com, and then the St. Vincent Journal Conversatio, which is for sale here in the bookstore.
Oh wow, yeah, you gotta make some shameless plugs.
Yeah, yep.
And lastly, if you're just like interested in the Civil War, buff at all, Evan does actually have videos on YouTube, right?
Yep.
With the American Battlefield Trust, right?
Yeah, I'm on the American Battlefield Trust channel, and then I also have my own YouTube channel.
Okay.
So just Google my name.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sweet. So maybe we'll have you back about other Civil War things in the future.
Yeah, I'm always game for it.
Okay, sweet. Well, thanks for having.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. No, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. And from all of us here at All Good in the Brotherhood, hope you have a blessed day. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate us on Spotify. That 5 stars goes a long way. Unless you hated it, then I guess 1 star. Follow us on YouTube now. We're doing bigger things there. More videos coming out every week. And we're on Apple Podcasts now. So if you got an iPhone, check us out there. Do all the things and have a God bless day. Adios.